Well, welcome, Syd Hiskey. I'm delighted to have you join me, actually, as I say, for what happens to be the first Compassion in a T-shirt in session. So, and I'm particularly delighted to chat with you, not just as a CFT therapist, but really, as a good friend. And in fact, the idea of Compassion in a T-shirt in session really is to get a chance to chat with people around the world, friends who I've met along the way in amongst, the whole CFT, Compassionate Mind Foundation sorts of things. So, lucky me, I thought, in terms of all of that. But, I think we met in 2017. Would that be right?
I think you're right. 16, 17, something like that.
16, 17. I think it was at the Manchester CMF conference. So it's been a few years. We didn't get to catch up last year,
No.
but I'm really looking forward to having a bit of a chat. How are you feeling? What do you think?
Likewise, when you mentioned this recently, I was thinking, oh, crikey, yeah. Most of all, more than anything else, it'd just be good to see you again. Find out how you are, what you're up to. It's been a really, really tricky 18 months for everybody, I guess, a year at least. So an opportunity to catch up. The Compassion and Mind Foundation conference each year is a really good chance to just see old friends again, as you said. That's what I like about the group, really. It's much more like a group of friends and family, really, rather than just a group of academics or clinicians. So we'll just we'll have a chat, see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. I've got a few sort of questions here, but I am hoping that we just sort of bounce back and forward and see how we're all going. But so I wondered, first of all, actually, whether you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps your work or your life and that sort of thing. Maybe even, currently what's interesting you or exciting you at the moment.
A little bit about me. Okay, so I'm in my early 50s. I live in the southeast of England. I worked for the NHS, National Health Service in the UK for many years, 15 plus years. I was a consultant in the latter part of that end of my career, and really enjoyed that work, but found it left me more people managing, service development, strategic thinking, all that kind of stuff, which was great, but not really how I saw the next half of my career go. So I moved into independent practice a few years ago, which I'd always been doing in the background, but it allowed me to focus much, much more on CFT, really, which is just a remarkable development. In terms of my background, I came to the whole thing late in the day, really. I come from a really traditional UK white British male family background. You left school, kind of go get a job, I think in the school I went to, 2 kids went to university each year, something like that. So it was a really, not usually the done thing. Bimbled about in different jobs and things, and then eventually got to university by the time I was 28. So I was a little bit of a late, really. But really enjoyed academia and managed to kind of sew together still just about clinical and academic life. So another good thing about CFT, really, it allows me to do that. So within that, is there any particular bit do you want to find out a bit more about?
I was curious there what you did up until 28. What sort of jobs were you doing there?
Well, my passion as a kid was always art, so I was always scribbling, drawing, etc. So I had ideas that it might be an illustrator. I'm not sure. To be honest, I was nowhere near strong enough in terms of those skills. Some of the kids out there were just fantastic. But I got to art college, which was great. I found my niche was graphic design, so I had an eye for design, which was good. But in those days, mid to late 80s, work like that, and there's a recession in this country as well. It's quite hard to find. And the family business had been printing, newspaper and magazine printing. So I sort of fell into the pre-production side of that, which was less the design side and more the everything before it gets printed side. So the design side of that. And I moved around in that for a few years, which was okay. But the last few years were essentially factory work. And because I didn't have many qualifications. I had to do full-time night shifts to then go to night school before I went to work, that kind of thing, for a few years to get the qualifications to go to uni.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see myself stuck in a factory for the
Mm.
rest of my days. So yeah, it was all that really, combination of that stuff. Just being
Mm.
curious about uni. When I first went, I think it was more about, have I got any chance of actually being able to complete a course, rather than I'm going to be a psychologist or I'm going to do this. My undergraduate degree was applied psychology and sociology, so I was quite interested in social science broadly,
Mm.
and then it began to coalesce into the individual, family systems, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, I was bimbling around really, just enjoying my teens and early 20s, not doing much, not
It's interesting.
aspirational.
It is interesting though, you know, like you sort of look at that, and those are the sort of experiences that we all kind of start to develop certain qualities, you know, like obviously creativity and playfulness is in there. You know, there's sort of hard work and determination and commitment to certain things. There was even that willingness and courage to sort of take a bit of a risk. You know, you weren't actually sure what was going to happen if you went off to uni, but you know, there you were, these different kind of qualities, and I always find it fascinating, you know, even just talking to people about just their experiences and what they've been through, and how we can start to see these qualities emerging early on. And so I think we're sort of the same then. I work in a private practice as well, and you're seeing sort of individual clients, and how does that work in the UK?
Um, right. So ever since I first started in the NHS, I always had a small private practice running alongside. So just a few clients here and there.
Yeah.
Typically, colleagues who might be doing some work in the private sector as well might say, look, are you seeing people privately? So it just trickled along in the background. And I did a little bit of medical legal work as well, report writing, that kind of stuff too.
Yep.
Accident reports, that sort of thing. So that was always there in the background. And then my kids had come around at the same time. And then essentially it just continued to grow.
Mm.
Um, I quite like it. I suppose it's fair to say I've always been fairly industrious. That made my dad cry with laughter. He used to tell me how, you know, feckless I was as a teenager, schlepping around, not doing much. But there's always been a fairly strong work ethic in the family.
Yeah.
And so I've always tried to be fairly busy. And I guess because of that, it just continued to grow and grow.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I do see mostly individual clients.
Mm.
Do some couple work. Occasionally, I work with family systems. It really, but it's usually through the lens of the individual, to be honest. So it's all
Mm.
about their needs expressed within the family. Yeah, and as I said, it just continued to grow over time till it got to a tipping point where my wife, bless her, pretty much turned around and said, "Look, you can't keep chasing both of these things. Which one are you going to do?" I just
Enough's
didn't really.
enough.
Yeah, just but you fall into it was the thing, and
Yeah.
research and academic side as well. There's so much out there that you can be doing. I've
Mm.
always loved that about this kind of job. It's a gift, really.
Mm.
So yeah, it moved into that, and then since being full time, just doing this, yeah, a lot of individual therapy work for a
Mm.
whole range of issues as well, from what we might in public services consider to be relatively milder issues, all the way to severe and enduring complex mental health problems as well. So yeah, really, really good spread actually.
Mm.
Is that true for yourself as well? Does it tend to work like that, or?
Yes, I think so. We have very much a mixture of public and private in Australia, and so we have, for example, Queensland Health has I've been employed by them before, the public sector health department, and worked in mental health and psychiatry, so, and alcohol and drug and other sorts of specific kind of agencies within that. And then we have quite a vibrant private sector as well, with some private health insurance, and also the government now too offers Medicare for clinical psychology in private practice. So people can have, actually, I think it's now up to 20 sessions with a private clinical psychologist to sort of access treatment. And you're right, yeah, very much the spread of a range of presentations, and you know, sadly in a way, very busy at the moment. And in fact, the sector here is struggling with waiting lists, and kind of finding people being able to find a clinical psych or a psychologist
Yeah.
at the moment. So it's actually one that I've been grappling with on the work front, how to deal with waiting lists. I mean,
Yeah. Well, when you suss that one out, let me know,
I'll let you
because
know.
well, it's exactly the same problem. I'm finding that
Yeah.
we won't go into that too much about the work side of things unless you want to, but it's really difficult because when people present it, in my experience locally at least, the level of need is quite high at that point. People don't come along to explore whether or not they're beginning to struggle and could look into a therapy. They normally come along when everything else they've tried hasn't worked, or they're just really in a tough place. So to then turn somebody away and say, look, I can't see you for several months, or I may not be able to see you at all, is really difficult. So I try and signpost people on wherever I can, but because of the pandemic and the amount of need that's uncovered, that's really quite a tough one.
Yeah.
And as a group, I think we need to be better at addressing that, because I struggle with that. I'm not sure what the best thing to do is.
Yes, we might even think about some sort of, kind of compassion-based interventions in the interim, because one of the things that can sometimes happen is if someone is on a waiting list, then they tend to wait and that therefore not really change in a sense. In some ways, it's worse to be on a waiting list and just wait than it is to perhaps, continue to look elsewhere or something. So it is interesting to think how we might be able to utilize that time in other ways. But yes, well, I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I did want to check in with you about all things compassion, because you mentioned there that a lot of your work is compassion focused therapy and your research work and other things that you do. But tell us a bit about your journey to compassion and self compassion and maybe even the compassion focused therapy thing. Like, how did you discover it or stumble across it or find it or something?
I think I think stumbling is the way to go on that one. I've done a lot of stumbling, really, in a good
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
This fabulous thing again, sort of drifting along. So for me, I thought about this
Yeah.
in terms of us talking. I thought, well, okay, how far back does this go? My dad, again, funnily enough, makes comment at times about sort of coming out of the womb talking in a way. So I was quite a talkative kid. Yeah, I was really talking a lot as a kid. So I've always been interested in just people, really, in relationships. That's always been there. And very early memories of care and being cared for, really, it doesn't, parts of my childhood that some people have very, very good memories of their childhood. Mine's reasonable, but the bits I remember really are those bits. And then there's some formative bits in terms of martial arts and stuff that we'll come on to too. But those experiences of care really stuck with me. And I think probably informed in the background my decision to shift career. Essentially, it was because it wasn't interpersonal or interactive enough. It was more productive. It was about
Yes.
producing things rather than being with people. And I love the guys I worked with, but I wanted some deeper, more sustaining relationships, I guess, and psychology seemed to offer that. Anyway, so getting to uni, originally I was going to be an academic psychologist, was my plan.
Right.
So straight to my undergraduate years, I moved into a PhD looking at post-traumatic stress, which was actually just before that. And my so at the end of my undergraduate years, my undergraduate dissertation, I got the opportunity to go to Namibia for 2 months and study a tribe of San Bushmen out there in terms of their color language. So studied linguistic relativity. And my time out there, living out there with those guys and a couple of anthropologists, really underscored this idea that the community, they're very, very big on your wealth is your relationships with others. So it really kind of got me thinking. So then when I moved into PTSD and academic psychology, what came through again and again and again, one of the most protective factors I kept coming up against really was about connectedness to other people. So within about the first year or so of my studies, I pretty much decided I need to do something applied. It's one thing to generate theory, etc., but I really want to work hands-on with people. And the best route I could see to doing that was to then do the doctorate in clinical psychology afterwards. So I
Oh.
did a year in the NHS. Yeah. So I did a year in the NHS as an assistant in child and family, again, very systemic,
Mm.
and then moved into clinical doctorate. And the doctorate itself is a slightly long-winded story, I'm afraid, but the doctorate itself was great, but the focus all seemed to be on the individual again. A
Oh.
lot of individual therapy, analytic psychotherapy, CBT. There was a module on systemic thinking as well, which was great, um, but it felt sort of underplayed or smaller. So all
Mm.
the time there's interest in people, systems, how they work together. So when I completed as that course, in those days, really, the route as I saw it was into neuropsychology. I was very interested in working with older people in particular.
Mm.
And in this country, if you work in older people's services, you end up doing quite a lot of neuropsychology, memory
Mm.
assessments, that kind of stuff,
Mm.
but also individual CBT. So that seemed to be where the evidence base was taking me. In my time in CBT, certainly within the first few years, showed me quite clearly, look, there are gaps, there's holes in this model. It's not, I
Mm.
think we have some pretty good CBT, but people aren't necessarily getting the recovery or the effectiveness from the therapy that we'd hope for. And of course, you go through a long phase of thinking, well, am I doing this right? And then, you train with lots of different people, and you come across similar themes as well. You think, no, I'm pretty sure we're having a good go at this. And
Uh-huh.
so we then began to look into further and wider therapies. And as part of that, while I was doing some dedicated CBT training, I came across Chris Irons.
Uh-huh.
And as you'll know Chris very well, Chris brilliantly kind of understated his role in CFT at this point. And we were just chatting away. And then in the latter part of that course, Debbie Lee came in to teach us about CFT. The course was really, really good, to their credit. It was a CBT course, but they expanded it out into, at that time, what were probably thought of as third wave CBT therapies.
Mm.
So there's something on ACT, CFT, and various different things. And the CFT just, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I went into that lecture and came out with a kind of silly grin on my face, really just thinking, hang on a sec, this stuff makes a
Mm.
lot of sense.
Mm.
So it seemed to not just plug gaps, but really make sense in terms of conceptual and theoretical understanding of how we tick a bit more.
Mm.
From then, I then started getting involved in the CFT conference scene. So just as an attendee, and
Mm.
I think I presented a poster at one of the early ones, and then started running a special interest group in the region for clinicians into CFT. So
Mm.
every couple of months since then, so about February 2012, we meet and then talk about all things CFT. So
Mm.
it's kind of expanded from there, really.
Mm.
Uh,
It's
and it
interesting
seems to
because
be snowballing, yeah.
what was that last bit?
It seems to be snowballing. It seems to be kind of,
Yeah. Mm.
interest in this growing. So that's good.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's the sort of intrapersonal, interpersonal, and group kind of elements of CFT, by the sounds of it, that really filled a bit of a gap, rather than it being this sort of more individualistic kind of working inside the person. How can we build upon relationships, and how can we build upon caring relationships, and that actually, sort of, not in a conscious way, but that was just part of your early life, in a sense, was that notion of not only relating to each other, but care being a part of that. And so you, in fact, the bit that you liked about your factory work was kind of that bit, the blokes, on the line, or whatever you describe it. That was, you kind of liked them. That was an affiliative kind of relationship.
Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
can
great fun.
imagine.
Great place to be. Yeah. But
Exactly. And then you sort of really started searching for, how can this, where can I find that notion of interpersonal, systemic caring for one another, affiliating, belonging together, and well, you stumbled across it in a sort of a pretty perfect way with Chris Irons and Deborah Lee, I guess. That sort of
oh,
sounds
yeah.
about right.
Yeah. I completely lucked out. I think what it was, now you say that, is I hadn't realized it until, of course, more recent years, about flows of compassion. It was really about
Yeah.
that. How care can flow, compassion can flow in different directions,
Right.
especially to the self, but very, very much between individuals. And it was that, I think, that notion really snagged with me as
Mm.
not the missing link, but a big part of what was missing,
Oh,
I think, in more technical or procedural ways that I was doing therapy up until that point.
yes.
So it
Yeah.
could have allowed a nice bridge between technique, if you like, and process. So yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant.
no, I definitely really appreciate that sort of bit of CFT and the contribution there of the three flows, it really does get you thinking differently, I think, with clients. So how do you now use CFT really within your work, and I guess your work as therapist, but maybe other things you're doing as well. But yeah, how does CFT kind of feature there?
Oh, well, while I was in the NHS, we, after the Francis report, which you no doubt will have heard of in the 2015, something like that, Francis report came out and was really critical of the lack of compassionate care within the NHS.
Okay, yeah.
So many trusts jumped immediately to respond to this, and I was part of what was called at the time building a compassionate culture within older people services in the NHS. And that led to us running a single-day conference to really try and raise awareness. And of course, that was another opportunity really for me to bring compassion-focused ideas, therapy ideas, to a much wider audience. So that was all chugging along in the background. In terms of, I've been doing some staff wellbeing workshops at a local private hospital recently as well. And again, that's about how to bring in compassion-focused ideas. But the biggest thing really, I guess, has been the Fierce Compassion Martial Arts kind of initiative that Bill Clapton and I have been involved in over the last, several years really, but formalized over the last 3 or 4 years. Just to say a bit more about that. In terms of individual work, as I said, standard CFT in many ways is the way that I go. I tend to do quite detailed formulation work, co-developed formulation, 3-circle model, all the stuff that you'd employ. But really, I think successively trying to help clients take more and more ownership of the process of therapy, really. So there's a lot in that. What would you like to pull out from that?
Are you finding that you use CFT kind of standalone, or do you find that you blend it with other things these days, or with the CBT from the early years and so on?
It's a good question, really. The blended is probably the answer. I always feel that everybody's therapy is quite different. CFT always features at some level, at some level. But whether a client seems to respond to a more behavioral approach or a more cognitive angles, more reflective, wants to think about their relationships again in terms of systemic issues. Quite often we'll weave in elements of EMDR, depending if that's needed as well for trauma reprocessing. Increasingly doing more and more narrative work as well, compassion-focused, expressive letter writing. I think is a lovely evidence base around that kind of approach as well. And elements, dare I say it, of motivational interviewing as well, Stan.
Very good.
Yes. Well, that workshop a few years ago was absolutely fantastic. So,
that's right. Yeah, that was
brilliant.
That was Birmingham, I think. Yeah.
So again, it really depends on the fit with the client. I've always disliked this idea that some clients or folk we might work with are less psychologically minded. I think, well, what do terms like that mean? This person might not be in therapy. So we should work harder to try and work out of the different elements that CFT and all the other therapies can offer, where would be the best fit. And that sort of moves me more towards more embodied approaches as well, which I think becoming more interested in lately as well. So how to situate the body within therapy, that kind of idea.
So I just on the blended kind of approach, I find that is sort of often how I'll work as well. But also on the other hand, the genius of Paul Gilbert in some ways is how he's brought so much different elements of theory and practice together into CFT. And, that a lot of the core behavioral principles or cognitive principles or other aspects of mindfulness and so on are kind of all in there a little bit. And so I become increasingly finding it difficult to sort of, work out whether I'm doing various things or whether this is what CFT is in a way, is a really integrated approach that draws on all of that. Working with fears, for example, is often, there might be an exposure element to that, as
Yes.
part of CFT or something, and that seems to just flow really well.
No,
Oh, and the embodiment stuff is really great. I'm keen to get to the bit where you might talk about your fears, compassion, and the martial arts stuff. But even for me, yeah, I definitely feel like chair work, acting, embodiment practices, a lot of that stuff feels really powerful and important. And
I completely agree. And like you, I think a struggle really to see, because everything seems to, not everything, but so much of how I think about things now comes through the lens of a compassion focus.
yeah,
Then I don't know if you do EMDR related work or whatever, it feels like a much more compassionate form of EMDR compared to how I would have delivered that, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago.
yeah,
When we talk about doing CBT elements, it's not as if there's a separate CBT and there's a separate CFT. CFT seems to be the base. Having said that, it always feels like it's quite coherent as an approach as well. I don't. I say to people a lot of the time, if you're going to use CFT, you have to really try and embed the ideas into that. So I'm always quite keen, I guess, with it that clients have a good theoretical or helpful enough theoretical understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. In my experience, it seems to lead to much more effective treatment, really, and a sense of ownership of the help that then continues after therapy finishes. That's what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, and kind of, that links to the wisdom, I guess, of the compassionate mind as well, is really kind of having a good mind awareness and mind understanding, and being able to notice the theoretical pieces, but in that very practical sort of way that then helps us to de-blame and de-shame, but also, sort of make efforts to manage and so on. What do you find as some of the challenges with all of that? I mean, obviously we've mentioned the fears, blocks, and resistances are one of the challenges that we sort of like to work with and through with people. But do you find any particular challenges working from a CFT model?
That's a good question. So I suppose my go-to there would always be variations on fears, blocks, and resistances, of course.
Yes.
A block that can come up at times would, I suppose, be around different levels of acceptance of evolutionary theory, whether or not that seems to chime with people, all the way from folk who might have particular faith views, which are fine. I don't think CFT is necessarily incompatible with those at all. I think there are ways of making those positions work together quite well. In terms of blocks, it's tricky to say, isn't it? Because so much of this we place on the therapy. What I've felt is over the years that the more that you do a particular kind of therapy or work in a particular way, the more it feels natural. And then I wonder if it's about whether or not you just have a way of working together with clients that allows you to work out where the two of you can fit together. And then it's less about the model and the approach you're bringing, but more about the way in which you do therapy, which just happens to draw upon those approaches. I'm not sure if that's very clear, but it's more about it. It feels like it infuses you in a way. It feels like it becomes part of what you do.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
There's a sort of link there to martial arts again, in a way, just in the sense that if you train with people that have been around for a very long time, they don't go and do their martial arts. They just go and train because that's what they do. And when you see them move, it just becomes part of what they do. Yes. And I suspect folk that do CFT for long enough, but all of us clients and therapists as well, that issue about common humanity, we get rid of those boundaries, and it's just folk trying to live a life that they can, that involves suffering in a balanced way, that causes the minimum amount of harm to others and themselves. Then you really start to get into, okay, what gets in the way of that? Are the kind of structural barriers, are the interpersonal ones, are the ones about belief, mindset, etc. So there's a range of different things that get in the way, but overwhelmingly, I tend to find that this therapy is really well received. People like the idea of actually there's a good underpinning model and rationale for how we tick that seems to make sense to a large number of people.
Yeah, I agree on a few fronts there. That one thing that you alluded to MI, motivational interviewing, before, and it's funny with MI because sometimes people will watch an MI video, like I might do a role play or something, and they'll go, well, you didn't even have to deal with any resistance, and actually the idea is that as you do the motivational interviewing and you work in that kind of mode, you often not a lot of resistance does arise, because that's sort of the point or whatever.
Yeah,
And I
you're
wonder,
rolling. Yeah,
just as you were speaking, I wonder whether that happens a bit with CFT as well, as we sort of learn it and understand it and embody it ourselves. The conversations relatively sort of efficiently, or sort of, there's a light touch there that means that there's not so much resistance, or not so much blocks and fears that arise. And it's just because of you're just there, you're just being with the person, you're able to kind of sort of assess at some level where they might be at with this stuff, and then kind of try to pitch it. You're not going to push on with an evolutionary model for someone who really feels that that's uncomfortable for them. And there is in CFT perhaps, and I'm just thinking out loud, kind of a nice dance like that, where we're just sort of moving with the person and exploring and so on. But I agree with you on the other point you made, and that is that it's often well received, including by people that we might jump to conclusions wouldn't like it. My PhD was actually with combat veterans with PTSD as well, and sometimes you hear people feeling like a veteran might not like the idea of self-compassion, and they certainly don't like to be self-pitying or self-indulgent. They're very keen to sort of, with that sense of team and loyalty and so on. But with a little bit of discussion, often it really becomes clear that compassion is a part of all of that, and compassion is a part of them, and they quite readily sort of start to take it on board.
Yeah, I agree entirely. My one of my good friends and close colleagues, Leanne Andrews at Essex University, we did our PhDs at the same time, and Leanne's work was about the avoidance component of PTSD, and she tended to look at, for a large part of her work, emergency personnel, so service personnel, ambulance, firefighters, police officers as well, and found a very similar thing. There's a real sense of kind of professional identity or armor that goes on, and that's protective in some way, and maybe compassion or showing emotion to some extent as well could be seen as a sign of weakness. But once you get beyond that and you get to the commonality of it, then you can really get some inroads in terms of therapy. So I think that these are just natural blocks that come up anyway, probably as part of the therapy process. And to me, CFT seems really a helpful vehicle to explain and talk about these things in a way that makes sense to us all, and then decide if we're going to move forward, and if so, how. Yeah, really, as you said, beautifully put together idea about the human condition. Definitely.
Yes, yeah. So tell us a bit about this, the fierce compassion and yeah.
I'm joking.
Do
How
we
long
have
have you
time?
got? Yay! Oh, happy days. So I didn't wear the fierce compassion t-shirt, and I thought about it, but I thought, no, we're not, we're
This
not
is
promoting
compassion
these
in a
ideas
t-shirt.
here. Yeah. It's compassion on a t-shirt. Yeah. I should have thought about that. So fierce compassion, martial arts in where to start.
Yeah.
So Neil Clapton, who you know very well,
Yes.
and myself have had many conversations about martial arts over the years, at conferences, emails, telephone calls, bars, anywhere. And Neil's really passionate about martial arts, as am I. And over the years, we kept coming back to again and again and again, there's something about our experiences and training that seemed to help in the therapy space. Not just in a, I don't know, not just in the way that you might think, as in therapists that train in martial arts are tougher in some ways. It's not about that. It's just the whole range of experiences within the martial arts seemed to be helpful. And we kept talking about this issue, and it coalesced into well, let's have a look what's out there. And there's not a great deal. There is some literature on that, but not a great deal. And then we thought, hang on a sec. Really what we need to be thinking about is, are therapists trained in as an expansive and experiential way as they might be? And that's what eventually led us to Fierce Compassion Martial Arts. So our interest originally was, how do we embody distress tolerance in therapy sessions, particularly for client anger, although not in any way exclusively. And what we found is training around this seems to be quite patchy. It's not something that I felt was explicitly managed in my own training or post-qualification training either. So Fierce Compassion Martial Arts is really training for therapists, a series of workshops around how do we take principles and ideas from martial arts and apply them to the kinds of dynamics that can present within therapy, so that we are able to manage conflict, ruptures, breaks in the therapeutic alliance as effectively and smoothly as we can, so we can stay within engagement distance, work through those, and therefore hopefully get to therapy in a, more effective manner, I guess. So It's about the presence of the therapist expressed through martial arts.
Yes. Now that really, kind of clarifies it for me. It's using the martial arts practices and the focus on the body to kind of stay able and engaged in the therapeutic process, whatever starts to develop in that process. And distress tolerance is so key there, isn't it? Not only for staying present and engaged, but that's that key part of compassion. It's obviously one of the qualities of compassion. Can give us a feel for even just a taster of like what do people experience in a workshop with you like that? What sorts of things do you do practically there?
So far it's a single day workshop. We've got a second day workshop planned as an add-on as well. So there's a sort of entry level and then an intermediate and then an advanced level as well. We do a fair amount of teaching about, to start with, about the background of all this stuff. So the research that is out there and what it shows. And then when it comes to hands-on practices, we will do drills like, first of all, there's a lot of laying hands on each other. So there might be a drill where there's about finding different people's center and balance. So while somebody might be in a conflict situation, they might be pushing forward, the other person links and then moves back. So you're trying to attune your movement. So what's called compassionate mind. So we might do something like that. We will do basic stance work as well. So static and dynamic movement drills. So an embodied stance that feels as though it's grounded and it can move fluidly if needed. So we do that. The different styles of martial arts, I've trained in a few, but Neil comes from a background in Taekwondo, which is much more deep rooted, much more, it looks more like karate in many ways, very strong. I come from a background in Wing Chun Kung Fu, which is much lighter on its feet, much more about connection and sensitivity. So we blend different drills from those two styles in particular, as well as others, to then give therapists a sense of how you might stay grounded in a session if need be, hold ground and stay with, or how you might fluidly stay with somebody if they move away from an encounter. So we show videos on anger as well. We'll talk about these things. We will do some punch drills as well, some striking drills, and then we'll do drills where we receive an attack in some way and stay with it, but you can't really see me doing it, but halt at the same time. So we stay in the presence of somebody, safely move to one side, halt the attack, and reaffiliate. So there's a process of confrontation and reaffiliation all the time. That's what we're aiming to.
Just say that again. Process of
confrontation in some way. There's been a break and then an attempt to reaffiliate in the moment as well.
Love it. Yeah.
So a lot of styles would originally kind of break and move away. Now you're in too far a distance to reaffiliate. What we want to do is break and stay to afford reaffiliation all the time. And the styles that we do lend themselves particularly well to that.
And what's the mechanism, do you think, from those practices embodied physically doing them and then in the chair kind of thing, and how one can sort of stay connected to that sense of, confrontation and reaffiliation?
Well, the process is a tricky one, really. I mean, there's a paper that we published late last year, radically embodied compassion, and how traditional martial arts could be a route into that, and that goes into it in a lot more detail.
Okay.
Essentially, I think it's the term that's often used is somatic metamorphism, which is a brilliant term, and it really means that the presence or the essence of the therapist or the martial artist is there, such that the other person's distress in a way is contained. So it's contained within the other, and it's fed back, or it's not responded to in a way that you might expect. So I'm frightened by your anger, or I become hostile towards it. I contain it, and in doing so, we can then stay in a space where we can work with it. To be honest, it's tricky, and I'm not trying to be difficult here, but because it's an embodied practice, we kind of need you to experience it. So
yes.
Things we're very keen on is there's so much intellectualizing about therapy process. We say, we need to be out of the chair. We need to be, you mentioned chair work earlier. I love chair work, absolutely fantastic, but we kind of want to be out of the chair work.
Yes. Out of the chair work.
Sensitivity, actually feeling when you link arms to somebody and feel their intention and their force.
Yes.
It's very, very powerful, very direct. You get away from the very subtle, with ruptures, you'll tend to get a withdrawal rupture. Somebody might move back, become avoidant in some way, or a confrontation rupture. They may become very dismissive of the therapy, or just angry or hostile in session. If you link with that, and again, kind of rolling with the resistance again, one of our papers is called Rolling with the Punches. It's a very powerful way of, I think, both de-shaming the experience for the individual, but also allowing you to say it's okay. Whatever you bring, we'll stay with that. We'll work with that. And that moment of kind of meeting together in that space, that's what we're trying to train, if you like, or entrain all the time. Try and train our ability to stay with that.
Yes. It's sort of, I don't know if this is right, but it's kind of like this combination of sort of boundaries and yet acceptance and sort of flexibility, but return, sort of, again, something of a dance, although it's sort of perhaps not the right word with martial arts, but it's sort of that fluid movement, kind of physically and emotionally with the other person.
Stan, you're absolutely right. The dances are great. That's a great way to look at it. And we often talk about behavioral synchrony as well. There's quite a lot of work been done on behavioral synchrony within psychotherapy. And we think that's the process that we're largely tapping into. How do we continue to signal the safeness to another person in the context of their increasing threat? If we can do it, I've seen it done many times in a martial arts context. Some of the really higher grades, some of the masters, some of the really skillful people I've trained with, as a junior grade, or somebody is training with them and training harder and harder, they're essentially just staying with it. They're perfectly fine. My old Kung Fu master used to say, I can take you up through all the gears if you want to. There's always another gear we can take you up to if you want, but only when you're ready. And that ability to manage that dance, not to predict, but to just really stay with and fluidly respond to what's going on, to synchronize your behavior to another. There's something about that is very grounding, really, and it leaves you, I think, much more accessible to the work that you're trying to do with the client.
Yes, in a recent paper that we're finally getting published, we developed a scale, and I did a poster on that one actually at one of the CMF conferences too. But it's looking at it's taking a motivational interviewing look at sort of change talk in compassion, or sort of motivation in compassion. And one of the factors that came out of the scale that was really most predictive of outcome kind of measures was distress tolerance, the person's sense of confidence or ability to cope and to sort of stay with the suffering and so on. And that I think that feels kind of key, really, in a way, because with compassion it's to do with suffering, and so at every level, that ability to feel strong and stable, and at the same time flexible and able to move, is sort of the distress tolerance bit, in a way. Do you see your radically embodied compassion being something one would offer clients, or is it more at this stage a kind of a therapist, a supportive approach?
It's a very good question. Yeah, at the moment it's still relatively fledgling, and you know, the reality is Neil and I have both got day jobs and therefore can only develop this at evenings and weekends and our mitzvahs and children's parties and anywhere we get a chance to be honest, you know. But yeah, so it's rolling out. Originally, it was sort of developed for therapists. That's who we were thinking in mind.
Right.
But we've had a few inquiries from various different folks saying, where can I access this? There are martial arts informed psychotherapies. There's a nice review paper that came out last year that showed you can get a moderate effect size by helping clients, you know, engage with martial arts directly. So whether or not there's a link there between the radically embodied compassion initiative and more mainstream martial arts, I suspect there is, but it will be a few years down the line, I would imagine.
Right.
We're part of a conference, hopefully in the summertime, which I think is being hosted in Australia, actually. There's an amazing martial artist out there called Georgina Very, who does a lot of Muay Thai kind of kickboxing approach. And I think she works exclusively with people who've experienced trauma. So in terms of reprocessing the trauma through the body. So there's a conference about how we unite different perspectives on this kind of theme across the world, really. So that will be amazing. So things are being done in relation to this. The radically embodied compassion really springs from CFT, and therefore there's no reason at all to think why it couldn't apply to clients. But at this stage, no, mostly for therapists. Yeah.
Does that mean you'll be in Australia next year, or does that mean you'll be on Zoom for that one, do you think?
Unfortunately, yeah, it's later on this year, so it's definitely going to be a Zoom job. But yeah, what we're hoping, though, is we have a one-day embodied workshop at this year's CFT conference, if it does go ahead in October.
Right.
So Deirdre and Sunil will hopefully be presenting and leading a workshop on yoga, and the second half of, so they'll do the yoga component, and then Neil and I will do an embodied martial arts component as well. So hopefully at this year's conference, depending on your availability and if it goes ahead, if you want to come along, you get a chance to actually feel this.
Yes, I think that's absolutely the next step for me. I worry that we're not going to be able to leave Australia for a long time yet, but we'll definitely see. So one of the things I was going to ask people towards the end of these chats is just for your sort of top 3 tips or something. I'm not sure whether you can sort of spring to mind with something like this, but what might be like, and I guess you know, whether it be therapists or just other people who are interested in CFT or experiencing CFT, or really just on their own journey of compassion and self-compassion, what might be, say, 3 things that you might kind of flag or recommend, or 3 tips, up to 3 or more?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember some time ago doing a training with Paul many years ago, really, and he finished the workshop in that kind of way he does, with, you know, sort of saying there's only 3 things you need to know about CFT, really. Only 3 things you need to do, and that's practice, practice, and practice.
Right.
Fantastically, you know, true. If I were being more specific about that, obviously it's about engaging in the practice. That's the number 1 thing. First thing I'd say is slow down. Yeah, certainly true in my own life and many of my clients as well.
Yeah.
Many folk, full stop. I know we're quick. We live hectic lives. So if you're able to slow down in any way to get in touch with what's going on, then that's number 1 thing to afford a greater sense of mindfulness. So just be more mindful of the speed at which you operate. What we all do. Second thing, I guess, is trying to acknowledge the role of powerful emotions. You know, don't turn away from this stuff. If you feel something, take the time to sit with it and explore it in yourself. I don't think there's any better way of distress tolerance than just sitting with emotions non-judgmentally. So that's really important. I suppose the third thing, if there were 3, would be about your self-narrative as well. I think that's really, really important. So listen to and guide your self-narrative. I've tended to use the term shepherding. I don't know where that's come from, but the idea of shepherding the self, you know, just gently guiding the self as well. I think how we relate to ourselves is absolutely fundamental in all of this. Yeah, so we're just saying the third one would probably be about shepherding, really. It would be about really paying attention to your self-narrative, the way in which you talk, conceive about of yourself. And I suppose if there were a fourth one, it would be about better physical self-care as well, just
Mm.
really making sure that you look after your body.
Slowing down, being with your emotions, guiding yourself through your self-narrative, and caring for yourself physically. Those sound like four key aspects. I think I will go away and try to embody them myself for this weekend. Actually, when I think about it, that you can see the martial arts really weaves through all of those four, now that I stop and ponder it. Good. All
I
right.
was going to say, it's been great talking to you today. Really good. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I suppose we might actually get those papers off you. So I might, or the references at least. You mentioned a couple of yours and maybe another review as well. That could be really useful to have some links attached down on the sort of the YouTube page. What about other ways that people can be in touch with you or connect with you as well? Are you on various social medias or anything like that you would be open to sort of connecting with people?
I'm not that present on the social media. Certainly, I'm very easy to find on the internet. So I've got a personal website about my own practice.
Okay.
There's the fiercecompassionmartialarts.com website as well. There's tons of information on there about what the work involves, Neil and myself, and you can contact me, or certainly contact me on either of those forums.
Okay.
My direct email is sydhiskey@hotmail.com if anybody wants to drop me a line.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll attach a link to the website as well in the description on YouTube. Mate, that was delightful, as I knew it would be. I was very keen to catch you. We've had some fun conversations, kind of face to face before, but probably not to this extent. So actually, it was a real joy to find out more of all of your journey here, but also your wisdom now. So thank you very much, mate. Thanks for being willing to come on to Compassion in a T-shirt in session.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much.